By the spring of 1943, the tide of the Pacific War was slowly turning. The Japanese Empire had reached the limits of its expansion, and the United States, wounded but not broken after Pearl Harbor, was striking back island by island. Yet deep within Japan's naval command, one man remained both feared and respected: Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack that had brought America into the war. To his men, Yamamoto was a symbol of Japanese naval brilliance. To the Americans, he was the architect of their humiliation. In April 1943, American intelligence officers working under the cryptographic program known as MAGIC intercepted a coded Japanese message. When decrypted, it revealed something extraordinary: Yamamoto's detailed travel schedule for an upcoming inspection tour of bases in the Solomon Islands. It even included times, flight paths, and aircraft types. For the first time, the United States knew exactly where and when the admiral would be. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was briefed on the intercept. The message offered a rare opportunity to strike directly at the heart of Japan's military leadership. Yet it also raised moral and strategic questions. Would assassinating a high-ranking officer change the course of the war, or simply provoke even greater Japanese vengeance? After a brief but decisive discussion within the top echelons of command, the order was given. The mission would go forward. Yamamoto was to be eliminated. Planning began under the highest secrecy. The operation, codenamed Operation Vengeance, was to be executed by a group of elite pilots from the U.S. Army Air Force's 339th Fighter Squadron, based on Guadalcanal. Flying the long-range Lockheed P-38 Lightning, these pilots were the only ones capable of reaching the target, more than 400 miles away, deep within Japanese-controlled territory. The mission demanded absolute precision. They would have to fly low at wave-top height to avoid radar detection and hit Yamamoto's aircraft at exactly the right moment. Every detail was meticulously rehearsed. Using the intercepted message, American planners calculated the admiral's departure time from Rabaul, his expected flight path, and the estimated minute he would reach Bougainville. The challenge was extraordinary. They would have to navigate across open ocean using only dead reckoning, strike the target at the exact location, and still have enough fuel to make it back alive. On the night of April 17, 1943, the selected pilots gathered for a final briefing. Major John W. Mitchell, a seasoned and calm commander, would lead the mission. Among the pilots was Captain Thomas G. Lanphier, known for his confidence and daring, and First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber, quiet but deadly precise. None of them were told who the target was, only that it was a high-value Japanese officer. Yet as they studied the plan, some began to suspect that only one man was important enough to warrant such a dangerous gamble. At dawn the next morning, the roar of twin engines broke the stillness over Guadalcanal. 18 P-38 Lightnings lifted off, carrying just enough fuel for the round trip. They climbed briefly, then dropped down to barely 50 feet above the water, weaving through clouds and rain to avoid Japanese patrols. The flight was long and tense. Every pilot knew that a single navigational error could mean disaster. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath them, empty, silent, deadly. Hours passed before they reached the calculated intercept point near Bougainville. Watches were checked. Fuel gauges were low. Then, at precisely 9:34 a.m., the lead pilot spotted two dark specks on the horizon, two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 fighters. The Japanese formation was right on schedule. The hunters had found their prey. As the P-38s climbed into attack position, the American pilots felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were about to strike at the man who had unleashed the flames of Pearl Harbor. None of them could know how much controversy this moment would spark, nor how deeply it would shake Japan's confidence in its own invincibility. The radio went silent. Major Mitchell's voice came through calmly. "Let's get him, boys." The ambush was about to begin. At exactly 9:34 a.m. on April 18, 1943, the calm skies over Bougainville erupted into chaos. Two Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, carrying Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and his staff, moved steadily along their planned route from Rabaul. 6 fighters circled protectively above, confident that no American aircraft could possibly be operating this deep within Japanese-controlled airspace. The Japanese had no idea that, hundreds of miles away, American intelligence had read their every move. From the east, 18 Lockheed P-38 Lightnings were streaking low over the ocean, barely 50 feet above the waves. Their engines thundered, but at that altitude, radar couldn't detect them. They had flown more than 400 miles on a knife's edge of fuel, guided only by maps, compasses, and calculations. Major John W. Mitchell led the formation with quiet precision. He knew there would be no second chance. If their timing was off by even a few minutes, the target would vanish into the clouds. Suddenly, the dark silhouettes of two bombers appeared against the morning sky. Mitchell broke radio silence. "Bogies 11 o'clock high." The pilots instantly understood. They had found the target. Splitting into attack groups, four P-38s climbed sharply to engage the fighter escort, while another group, led by Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber, turned toward the bombers. The ambush was underway. The Japanese Zeros reacted instantly, diving down to meet the attackers. The air filled with gunfire and tracer rounds. At that moment, Yamamoto's escorting aircraft tried to climb into the clouds, but the P-38s were already in perfect attack position. Lanphier pulled hard on the stick, gaining altitude before rolling into a steep dive. He aimed directly for the lead bomber, Yamamoto's plane. The Betty bomber, painted in dull green, flew straight and level. Inside, Yamamoto sat near the cockpit window, wearing his dress uniform and white gloves. He was known for his punctuality and discipline. Even on a combat flight, he insisted on keeping to his schedule. But this morning that habit would seal his fate. Lanfear fired a burst from his 4 machine guns and 20mm cannon. Tracers tore through the sky, striking the bomber's left engine. Flames erupted instantly. Lieutenant Barber, flying slightly below, raked the fuselage with another volley. The Japanese bomber shuddered, smoke pouring from its wings. A few seconds later, it rolled sharply to the left, losing altitude fast. Inside the doomed aircraft, Yamamoto's aide reportedly shouted for him to bail out, but the admiral made no move. Witnesses later said the bomber's right wing tore off before it plunged into the jungle below. The explosion sent a column of black smoke rising into the sky. The time was 9:43 a.m. The commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy was dead. The second bomber, carrying Rear Admiral Igaki, tried to escape by diving into the trees. It too was hit, but managed to crash land near the coast. Igaki survived, bloodied but alive, and would later record in his diary the shock of seeing Yamamoto's aircraft vanish into the forest. Meanwhile, above the chaos, American and Japanese fighters twisted and turned in deadly combat. Zeros swarmed around the P-38s, but the Americans' superior firepower and speed kept them alive. Lanfear and Barber each claimed credit for downing Yamamoto's bomber, a dispute that would last decades. But in that moment, none of them cared about credit, only survival. Low on fuel and ammunition, the P-38s began their long return journey to Guadalcanal. As they broke away from the fight, the surviving pilots looked back and saw smoke still rising from Bougainville's jungle canopy. They didn't yet know whose plane had gone down, but deep down, they sensed that their mission had succeeded. The cost had been high, one American pilot was lost, but the result would echo across the Pacific. Hours later, the first reports reached Rabaul. When Yamamoto's aircraft failed to arrive, search parties were sent out immediately. It wasn't until late that afternoon that Japanese soldiers found the wreckage deep in the jungle. The scene was grim. The bodies of the crew lay scattered around the shattered fuselage. Yamamoto's body was found still seated, his hand resting on his sword, a calm expression on his face. 2 bullet holes marked his chest and shoulder. Instant death. Word of his death was kept secret from the public for weeks. The Japanese high command feared the devastating impact it would have on morale. To his men, Yamamoto had been more than an admiral. He was the spirit of Japan's naval power, the man who had dared to challenge the United States. Now that symbol was gone. When the Americans confirmed the success of Operation Vengeance, the pilots were sworn to secrecy. President Roosevelt himself ordered that no details be released that might reveal the Japanese codes had been broken. To the world, it would appear to be pure luck. Only later would history uncover how precise and how personal this mission truly was. Above Bougainville, the smoke slowly faded. The jungle swallowed the wreckage, the sound of battle replaced by silence. But that silence marked the end of an era. The man who had once predicted that Japan could run wild for 6 months had been brought down in the 7th. The news of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death spread through the Imperial Japanese Navy like a thunderclap. For nearly 3 weeks, the high command in Tokyo kept the truth hidden, suppressing every rumor and delaying the official announcement. Only a small circle of officers knew what had truly happened on April 18, 1943, that the architect of Pearl Harbor, the symbol of Japan's naval pride, had been ambushed and killed by American fighter planes. Even among those few, disbelief reigned. Yamamoto had been the face of Japan's military power, a man whose very presence inspired confidence. Now he was gone, and the empire stood shaken to its core. In the immediate aftermath, the Japanese Navy launched an extensive search and recovery operation on Bougainville Island. Jungle terrain made the task grueling. Humidity, thick vines, and swarms of insects slowed every step. When the recovery team finally reached the crash site, they found the wreckage scattered across the forest floor, half buried in mud and ash. The once proud Mitsubishi G4M bomber lay twisted and broken. In the forward cabin, Admiral Yamamoto was discovered still seated upright, his katana by his side, his body untouched by scavengers. His face, witnesses later said, appeared calm, as if he had met death with the same discipline that had defined his life. His remains were carefully carried out of the jungle and flown first to Rabaul, then onward to Tokyo under the strictest secrecy. There, preparations began for a state funeral unlike any Japan had seen during the war. Yet even as the ceremonies were planned, the Imperial Navy faced an internal crisis. Yamamoto had been more than a strategist. He was a unifying figure who bridged the gap between the traditionalists who worshipped the samurai code and the younger officers who favored modern naval aviation. Without him, rival factions began to surface, each claiming to know what the admiral would have wanted. For the Japanese government, the timing could not have been worse. The war that had once seemed full of promise was beginning to turn against them. The defeat at Midway had already shattered Japan's carrier strength. The long and bloody campaign for Guadalcanal had drained men and material. Now, with Yamamoto dead, the psychological blow was immense. To the Japanese public, the admiral had been the invincible mind behind every great victory. To lose him, not in battle commanding his fleet, but ambushed from the sky, was almost unthinkable. When the government finally made the announcement on May 21, 1943, Japan came to a halt. Radio stations across the nation interrupted their programming to deliver the shocking news. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, died in battle on April 18th while courageously leading his forces. The statement portrayed his death as an act of heroism and sacrifice, but the omission of details only fueled speculation. Few civilians knew that American planes had deliberately hunted him down. The Empire was told he had died in aerial combat, a vague phrase that preserved his image as a warrior who faced death head-on. Public mourning was immediate and profound. Flags were lowered to half-mast. School children were gathered to bow their heads in silence. Factories paused production for moments of prayer. Newspapers published special editions filled with photographs of Yamamoto calm, determined, dressed in his immaculate naval uniform. His portrait was placed in shrines and government offices, often surrounded by incense and flowers. The government encouraged the people to see his death not as a defeat, but as a call to redouble their loyalty to the emperor. Behind the scenes, however, the mood was grim. Many officers privately admitted that Yamamoto's death left an unfillable void. He had been one of the few Japanese leaders who truly understood the industrial might of the United States and had warned that Japan's victories would be short-lived if the war dragged on. He famously told colleagues before Pearl Harbor, "For the first 6 months of war, I will run wild. After that, I can promise nothing." Those 6 months had long passed, and his prediction was proving tragically accurate. At the naval headquarters in Tokyo, his successor, Admiral Manichi Koga, took command of the combined fleet. Koga was a competent officer, but he lacked Yamamoto's charisma and strategic creativity. Under his leadership, the Japanese Navy became more cautious, retreating steadily in the face of American advances. The once dominant Imperial fleet began to fight defensively, losing both momentum and morale. Many sailors whispered that the spirit of the Navy had died with Yamamoto. In Washington, the success of Operation Vengeance was celebrated quietly. The mission had achieved exactly what American intelligence had hoped for: the elimination of Japan's most skilled and dangerous strategist. Yet even the Americans understood the weight of what they had done. They had not just killed an admiral, they had removed Japan's best chance at negotiating peace or managing a realistic defense. Some historians would later argue that Yamamoto's death accelerated Japan's path toward catastrophic defeat by leaving its naval command fractured and uncertain. Meanwhile, in Japan, the funeral was carried out with the full splendor of imperial ritual. His ashes were divided, half interred at Tama Cemetery in Tokyo, the other half sent to his family shrine in his hometown of Nagaoka. Thousands lined the streets as the funeral procession passed, many weeping openly. Warplanes flew overhead in formation, their engines echoing through the capital as the nation said farewell to the man who had once dared to challenge the United States across the Pacific. After the ceremony, Emperor Hirohito personally awarded Yamamoto the posthumous title of Marshal Admiral of the Navy, a rare honor reserved for Japan's most revered military leaders. The gesture was meant to strengthen national resolve, but to many, it only underscored the deepening tragedy of the war. Japan had lost not just a commander, but a guiding mind capable of understanding both the enemy and the limits of Japan's own power. In the months that followed, American forces continued their relentless advance through the Solomon Islands and beyond. Without Yamamoto's steady hand, Japanese naval operations grew increasingly desperate. The empire that had once dreamed of dominating the Pacific was now forced into a fight for survival. Yet, Even as the tide turned against Japan, Yamamoto's legend only grew. His image was immortalized in propaganda, his words quoted in military academies, and his memory invoked as a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice. In truth, he had never wanted war with America, but once ordered to fight, he gave it everything. His death became both a rallying cry and a haunting reminder of what Japan had lost. Not only its greatest admiral, but also its last true realist. By the end of 1943, as Japan's fleet retreated and its cities came under fire, many officers looked back on that April morning over Bougainville with bitter clarity. The gunfire that brought down Yamamoto had done more than kill a man. It had shattered the confidence of an empire built on illusion.